Good morning and welcome to our discussion. Welcome, Mark. Mark, firstly, can you give us a quick overview of Oak as the business and where it all started and how you actually ended up in Guernsey?
Morning, Eugene. Yeah, purely by accident. In 1997, I was in Jersey with a pal of mine and finished up chatting to a fellow who was the senior partner of Ernst & Young in Jersey, and had a chat to him the next day, and I finished up with a job at Ernst & Young in Jersey, which lasted for 18 months until they sold the business. And I decided that doing my own thing was far more reliable than having a boss, and went over to Guernsey with a friend of mine and set up Oak in Guernsey. So I moved here in 1999, and there was one employee, Stacey, who's a lady that's been with me since day one. She's still with me 24 years later. And after that, we employed people as we could find them, decent people, and we added one and one and one. And we got to about 30 people in 2018. We were approached by a fund to consolidate their business with what we had. We had at that stage Guernsey, Malta, and Mauritius. They had Isle of Man and Jersey, which was a nice compliment. And so we sold 75% of the business to the fund that's listed on the Channel Islands Stock Exchange, and subsequently purchased a fund administration business, which is Guernsey-based. All the businesses were then converted to the name of Oak, and today we're about 230 people around the world.
Thank you very much for that overview, Mark. Now we know that trusts have long been a vital element in a financial planner's arsenal, especially when it comes to estate planning. Can you perhaps elaborate a bit on the background to trusts and what started them in the first place?
Well, trusts go back sort of to the Middle Ages when the knights were going off to war on their campaigns. And they had their family sitting at home, and they generally had a henchman that looked after the family while they were away. And the knight would say to his henchman, "I'm going to leave you the assets to look after for the benefit of my family. If I don't come back, this is what I want to happen." And that's how trusts originally started. And over the years, they've developed subsequent to that, to what we have today in numerous jurisdictions.
Thank you for that, Mark. It's obviously interesting to see how trusts have changed throughout the years. Now, you mentioned earlier that you've spent quite a lot of time with the business, in excess of 30 years. So where are your offices based, and can you perhaps give us some examples of the clients that you've assisted throughout the years?
Certainly, Eugene. Our offices, as I said earlier, are based in Isle of Man, Jersey, Guernsey, and Mauritius. Malta office, which we had, we closed down, and we moved all the back office that we were doing there down to Mauritius. The Jersey operation does funds and trusts. Our Guernsey office funds and trusts. Mauritius, we have the ability to do funds and trusts. We've done very little funds work there. Types of clients we've dealt with are varied. Initially, when we started the business, most of our clients were South African. We then developed the business into Zimbabwe, Kenya, East Africa, and the Zim business was really interesting in the old days. It's changed a lot, with the issues of currency control and Mugabe's activities that took place. But we did a lot of work with the fruit farmers and the flower farmers, where we chartered a 747. We were flying 3 loads of flowers into Amsterdam per week. Really interesting stuff where we could actually help clients not only look after their affairs, they were struggling to get currency internally. So we would sell the product outside South Africa, outside Zimbabwe and South Africa, and we would then be able to pay the creditors with hard currency, and the balance would come back. There was also preferential rates if you prepaid for exports. So we almost got into a financing business where we were buying the stuff up front and giving the farmers great benefits as far as their currency conversions were concerned. Obviously, with that came clients wanting trusts because they would have accumulated some money offshore, and they wanted a safe pair of hands to look after it. very difficult to get private bank accounts for Zimbabwean and South African nationals overseas. So we almost acted as a private bank for clients where we could actually make their payments for them, pay their school fees, medical aids, that sort of thing. Moving to SA, a lot of the clients that we have exported money over the years, needed a place to have their money. A lot of them already had trusts, Eugene, but didn't feel that they had the service levels from the service providers which they had, and wanted somebody a bit more friendly, somebody that they could talk to, somebody that traveled more regularly to SA. And so a lot of the clients are historic and have come from other service providers. But ideally, with the new clients, we would have a setup, and guys would transfer the assets into the trust, either via donation, in which case they would pay the donations tax, or via loan account. And that's what we're finding at the moment. Most of the clients that are coming to us are people that have got money offshore, want to have a safe place for it, don't want to go through a whole difficult probate scenario where they've got 15, 16 different assets. They want everything consolidated in one place. They want to be able to get an asset statement from one particular individual or organization, as opposed to trying to put it all together themselves. So that's the second type of thing we've helped with. The third thing is with people going back into South Africa. There's numerous people that have been outside South Africa for 5, 10, 15 years. Some of them have been very successful outside South Africa and have accumulated assets. So we found that where they haven't already set up their own structures, that they're going back to SA. By setting up a structure and going back to South Africa, they externalize those assets and keep them outside their state duty plan when they do go back to South Africa. So we've recently had a case where a guy has been in the trading industry, he's got a lot of assets, has moved back from the UK to South Africa, and we've set up a structure for him to hold those assets now that he's in South Africa. He doesn't have to worry about inheritance tax anywhere else in the world. And he's pretty comfortable that his business effectively is run outside South Africa, although he's sitting in South Africa and his business runs very well. So those are the sort of things that we've done, Eugene. We've also been very involved with people that have left South Africa, gone to Israel and places like that. We've got involved with a number of property developments where we run the administration for the developments offshore. A big part of our business in the past has been owning residential property for clients. So we've set up SPVs, special purpose vehicles for residential properties or commercial properties. They were pretty effective when people wanted a bolt hole and they thought about going to the UK, but with the ATED charges, which is a tax which the British HMRC, the tax office in the UK, implemented, which is called the annual tax on envelope dwellings. If you've got a property in a corporate structure and you utilize the property yourself, you get charged this ATED charge on an annual basis, which has made it less attractive to hold residential properties for your own use in a corporate structure. So we still do hold a lot of residential property in companies and SPVs for individuals, but it's far less than it was in the past.
Thank you, Mark. You've mentioned quite a few things that really show the value of trust, but also some drawbacks to structures that don't really fit well. Now, from a practical perspective, what are the glaring parts that clients or advisors often miss when deciding to set up an international trust?
Not getting the right tax advice up front. We will not take on a structure now unless we've got proper professional tax advice. And we found in many cases, unless you get that right up front, it's very easy to throw a trust together and put assets into a trust. But you've got to make sure what the repercussions are going to be further down the track.
Thank you, Mark. Now, international trusts do have some very key differences to trusts in South Africa specifically. Can you perhaps explain the different parts of a trust, maybe starting with the settler, the trustee, the beneficiary, the protector, and those sorts of things?
Sure. Well, settler is the person that puts the money into the trust. So he's saying to the trustees, I've got this pot of cash. I want to divest myself of these assets. And he gives those to the trustees to look after for the benefit of the beneficiaries. So a trust would be set up, and generally you would have a letter of wishes, which would instruct or advise the trustees as to what you wished to happen in the event of certain things happening, like death of the settler, death of the settler's wife, or death of the kids, or the whole lot of them. So in many cases, you'll find that the settler says that if anything happens to me, it must go to my wife. If anything happens to if anything happens to myself and my wife, the assets sort of go to the kids, and to be split 50-50 between the two kids. You know, if one of the kids predeceases us, it would go to their specie or their kids. So that letter of wishes is generally put in front, up front, Eugene. It's not a binding document as far as the trustees are concerned. It's for advice only. Most of the trusts that we set up are discretionary trusts. So the trustees generally have a discretion as to distributions. So just an example, let's assume that settler dies and leaves assets to two kids, and one of the kids has been found to be riddled with drugs and, you know, on a big binge. We're certainly not going to make a 50% payment to a kid in that sort of scenario. We would really look at what the father would have done if he'd known what the scenario was, and we'd act responsibly in that case. So these are things that are out of the ordinary. You know, it's not something normally we would follow the letter of wishes, as long as they were reasonable. And we're generally involved with helping with the writing of the letter of wishes up front, so we know what's in them, and we give advice at that stage. Beneficiaries, as I say, are the people that are going to benefit. So we always make sure that we've got a number of beneficiaries so that we don't finish with a trust with no beneficiaries. So it's generally, it runs through the sort of age group, father, wife, kids, grandkids. Sometimes charitable structures are put in place as beneficiaries in the event of, you know, families that don't have children, don't have other families. We have one which benefits the World Wildlife Society largely if anything happens to the husband and his wife. The protector is an interesting individual. He has a number of functions depending on what the settler wants him to do. So he could be involved in making investment decisions, changing trustees, making distributions. You know, there's a number of things, and we generally give them a shopping list. We give the settler a shopping list up front and say these are the things that a protector would normally be part of his activities. Which of these do you want? And some of them just drop away, but you'll generally have 4 or 5, and we'll have those in a schedule in the trustee, so that the protector would know exactly what his responsibilities were.
Thank you, Mark. Now, you mentioned earlier that you have offices in various jurisdictions around the world. What would cause a client to pick a particular jurisdiction over another one, for example, to set up a trust?
I think obviously the double taxation agreements are important. So we would look at, you know, what the structures, you know, similarly to what I said earlier, we want the tax advice, and generally you'll find that the tax advice will guide you in a certain direction. A number of the jurisdictions are exactly the same, so it doesn't matter. But I think that one of the most important things with trusts is relationships. And firstly, relationships, and probably secondly, costs. Because unless you've got a relationship with the trustee, it's never going to be a success. So you really need to know your trustees. Your kids need to know the trustees, because if the folks aren't around, the trustees have got to know who to go and talk to and actually understand the family dynamics. And the second thing is obviously costs of these structures. A place like Mauritius is easier to find staff. Costs of staff are cheaper. Costs of property, etc., is cheaper. So a place like Mauritius by default is going to be cheaper than a place like Jersey, for argument's sake, which is a very expensive jurisdiction to work through.
Thank you very much, Mark. Now, quite clearly, fees are a very important part of the consideration, especially the points you touched on, mentioning how the domicile of the trust can actually affect the fees the client ends up paying. Now, just before we finish off, If a client had to have a trust with a specific trust company or trustee, how difficult would it be for the clients to move those trusts, especially if the trust company or the new trustee sits in a different jurisdiction?
Eugene, it's not a difficult thing. You would need to write to the existing trustee and say to them you wanted to move the trust to another jurisdiction or to another service provider. If you're moving to a different jurisdiction, we suggest that the law of the trust is changed to the jurisdiction where the new trustees are going to be based, because they'll generally know the legalities of that jurisdiction as opposed to other jurisdictions. So it's not a difficult thing to do. It can take some time. We found in a number of cases where we've tried to move trusts that it's been difficult from the perspective that the existing trustees haven't done what they're supposed to do in the past and haven't kept proper financial records, etc. And I'm dealing with something presently where we're moving a number of trusts for a portfolio of friends to ourselves, and we're having to change the jurisdiction of each of the trusts. But the trustees haven't in the past kept proper books and records. So it's a matter of almost them going back to inception of these trusts and recreating the work that they should have done in the past. Now, they've probably been really cheap in the past. The reality is they've never done the job properly. They've never given the clients the service that they need. And that's why for each structure that we keep, we make sure we do financial statements on an annual basis so the client can see exactly what his assets and liabilities are in the trust. Generally no liabilities, but certainly the assets. And, we keep them up to speed. So I think the two main aspects, one is making sure that you're happy with a new service provider, getting the domicile, the law of the trust moved to the correct jurisdiction or to the jurisdiction that you're moving the structure to, and getting reasonable fee base. When a trust moves from one trustee to another, there's a document called a deed of retirement and appointment of new trustees, which we get our lawyers to draft. If we're moving stuff away from us, whoever the outgoing trustee is would be responsible for getting that trust document drafted or that deed of retirement drafted. It's generally referred to as a DORA, a deed of retirement and appointment of new trustees. That's an agreement between the old trustees and the new trustees. It tells us what our responsibilities are and what the responsibilities are of the previous trustees, guarantees, indemnities, etc. And once that is signed, the assets move across from the old trustee to the new trustee. We take it onto our systems and we resume the role that the previous trustee took on.
Thank you very much for your input and insight today, Mark. Quite clearly, there are a number of things advisors need to look out for. We really value your input, and I look forward to continuing the discussion with you in future.
Thanks, Eugene. It's been a pleasure being here this morning.